Tonight, I want you to imagine something ordinary. A small lantern in your hand and the narrow mountain path ahead. In daylight, you barely notice the edge. You talk, you look around, you step wherever you like. But at night, the very same path becomes a question. One careless step and the ground is not there. The epistemic firewall is that lantern. It is not a wall that says stop. It is a light that says know where you are. And if Holophase is going to be a new science, a new language powerful enough to speak about time, space, motion, energy, structure, information, even the shape of understanding, then this lantern is not optional. It must be the backbone. Because the more powerful your language becomes, the more dangerous your overconfidence becomes. Holophase science does not begin with equations. It begins with restraint. That restraint is not humility for decoration. It is structural necessity. The kind of necessity you feel when you realize that a single mistake on a mountain ledge is not philosophically interesting. It is simply a fall. So let us begin in the Holophase language itself, the one we are learning together. There is one field, Phi, the Holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When Phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as nu, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how Phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. Now here is the first decisive point. In Holophase, a law is not a hidden substance sitting behind phenomena. A law is grammar. A law is a constraint on admissible Phi patterns. And the moment you say grammar, you must also say audit. Because grammar can be elegant and still be wrong. Grammar can be beautiful and still be unlicensed. Grammar can be popular and still be a lie. This is the core axiom of the firewall, and we will repeat it until it becomes instinct. Rules do not become real by elegance, consensus, or tradition. They earn a license only by surviving falsification, variation, independence, and scope discipline. And the second axiom, equally important. When a rule fails, we do not believe harder. We tighten, downgrade, or retire its license. Two sentences, a whole civilization's safety standard. But to feel why it must be the method of Holophase science, we need to walk through an everyday story, because the mind understands method when it sees consequences. Imagine a town with a river. In late summer, the river is calm, shallow, friendly. Children step on stones, people cross with baskets, animals drink without fear. In spring, the same river is a different creature. Snowmelt swells it, it braids into new channels, it eats the bank, it hides holes beneath foam. Now, picture a stranger arriving in late summer, crossing easily, and then announcing to everyone, "This river is safe, always." That stranger is not science. That stranger is scientism. Scientism is what happens when you take a local success and turn it into universal authority. It is the disease of unification. It is narrative gravity, a strong story pulling everything into itself, even what it has not earned. Holophase, because it is unifying, is more vulnerable to this disease, not less. If you claim that time, space, motion, energy, structure, and information are all expressions of one cyclic order field, you have placed a powerful magnet inside the cultural mind. People will want to use the language to explain everything, now, loudly, and without limits. So the firewall exists to stop the stranger's mistake from becoming the town's disaster. Holophase science must be conducted under the firewall, because holophase is a language, and languages can be corrupted. A corrupted language does not merely produce wrong sentences, it produces wrong cultures. It produces teachers who cannot admit uncertainty. It produces papers that hide failures to protect reputations. It produces communities that worship elegance instead of survival. The firewall is the immune system against that corruption. To understand it deeply, we must see what it protects. 4 commitments, 4 pillars, like 4 stones holding a bridge. First pillar, Phi-Closure. Reality is described by phi and its derivatives. No extra primitives are allowed as shortcuts. If something looks unexplained, we do not patch the gap with a new substance, a new force, or a metaphysical whisper. We either improve measurement, narrow scope, or propose a broader phi-closed grammar with clear falsifiers. Second pillar, tri-unity. Every admissible description must reconstruct omega, k, and nu together, from phi under license. Time, space, and motion are not separable stages. They are coupled shadows of the same derivative structure. A time-only story is unlicensed as a fundamental claim. A space-only story is unlicensed. A motion-only story is unlicensed. Third pillar, energy demotion. Energy is accounting. Energy is tally. Energy is ledger. Energy is never substance, never cause, never an object of worship. In holophase science, energy is the bookkeeping summary of how coherent the omega k nu triunity remains under an admissible constraint in a declared window. If the ledger does not reconcile, that mismatch is frontier information, not metaphysical panic. Fourth pillar, corrigibility. The method must be able to downgrade itself. A doctrine cannot retract, it only defends. A science must be able to narrow scope, downgrade confidence, archive anomalies, and retire rules without humiliation or collapse. These pillars are not abstract ideals. They are the practical conditions of truth. Now, to make them audible, let us speak the core equations as speech, not as chalk. We begin with phi of x and t, meaning phi as a function of position x and time t. We define omega, time's shadow, as omega equals d phi over dt. In plain terms, omega measures how fast phi turns in time. We define k, space's shadow, as k equals the gradient of phi. In plain terms, k measures how phi slopes across space, how the cycle shifts from one place to the next. We define nu, motion's shadow, as the coupling that turns time turning and space slope into propagation. In simple wave scopes, nu equals omega divided by k. Say it slowly. Nu equals omega over k. In plain terms, travel speed is time rate divided by spatial patterning. Now, the firewall's voice enters. Every time you say these symbols, you must also say scope and uncertainty. Because omega equals d phi over dt is not a spell, it is a reconstruction recipe. And recipes only work under conditions. If your measurement of phi is noisy, omega is uncertain. If omega and k are uncertain, nu is uncertain. Uncertainty propagates. That is not weakness. That is honesty. So what, operationally, is the firewall? The firewall is a loop, like a maintenance routine that keeps a machine from exploding. And Holophase needs such a routine because it is ambitious. It wants to speak in one language across many domains. That ambition is only safe if the method is strict. Here is the 10-step firewall loop, spoken like a craft discipline. Step 1. Propose a constraint on phi patterns. Say what is constrained and say what would count as failure. Step 2. Reconstruct omega, k, and nu jointly from phi data inside the declared window. Step 3. Declare scope in all three handles: the omega scale, the k scale, and the nu regime. Step 4. Track uncertainty explicitly and carry it forward to derived quantities. Step 5. Test falsification. Specify what observation would force a license action. A rule without a falsifier is mythology. Holophase science forbids mythology. Step 6. Test variation. Change conditions within the claimed scope. If the rule collapses, the scope was exaggerated. Step 7. Test independence. Use independent instruments and pipelines. If only one pathway produces the result, you have a candidate, not a kernel rule. Step 8. License provisionally. If the rule survives the gates, the community assigns a license, valid in window W with uncertainty U under assumptions A. Step 9. Archive the shadow. Every failure, anomaly, and near miss is recorded. Today's anomaly is tomorrow's frontier map. Step 10. Maintain and evolve. New data can tighten the license, narrow it, downgrade it, or retire it. Frontier signals can trigger new grammar proposals, provided they remain Phi-closed, triunity consistent, and falsifiable. That loop is not bureaucracy. It is the forge that produces reliable knowledge. Now we come to the phrase, the eternal frontier. Why is the frontier eternal? Because each time you light up a region of reality with licensed grammar, you reveal its edges. The edge is not failure. The edge is the next question and the next honesty. In Holophase terms, the frontier is where our current admissible constraints on phi cannot reconstruct omega, k, and nu together with stable coherence inside one scope. It is where the triunity cannot be jointly locked without trade-offs the current grammar cannot resolve. It is where the energy tally stops stabilizing across representations and starts disagreeing in persistent ways. The firewall tells you, do not hide that. Do not explain it away. Map it. This is why the firewall is a compass. It does not prevent exploration. It prevents counterfeit closure. Let me add one more everyday scene, because the firewall becomes real when you see how it behaves in ordinary responsibility. Imagine you are buying honey in a market. The seller has a scale. If the scale is old, the needle wobbles. If the seller is honest, he says, about 1 kilo, plus or minus a little. If the seller is dishonest, he still claims exactly 1 kilo, because the word exactly sounds powerful. The firewall is the rule that forbids the dishonest exactly, unless the instrument and the procedure truly support it. In science, we do not earn authority by sounding certain. We earn it by reporting limits. This is why the firewall is sometimes better imagined not only as a torch, but also as a firefly, small enough to fit in a single habit. The firefly rule is simple. Every strong claim must be followed by 3 small words: scope, uncertainty, falsifier. If you cannot say those 3, the claim is not yet science. It may be a hypothesis, it may be imagination, but it is not licensed. Now, one brief image from the geographical beauty of Afghanistan, used only to clarify and then to exit. Picture a river born from snow high in the mountains. Water begins as silence in ice, then becomes movement in melt, then becomes a river with memory of the slope. In one bend it is calm, in another it roars between rocks. A wise guide never says, the crossing is always safe. The guide says, safe here, now, under these conditions. and points to signs: water speed, depth, color, and the feel of the bank. Those signs are falsifiers. The statement is scoped. The uncertainty is admitted because the river is alive. That is triunity in everyday language. Time conditions, space geometry, and motion coupling together. There is also energy demotion. Energy in the river is not worship. It is accounting for what the river can do to you and your bridge. Now we speak about what a mature holophase field looks like, because the firewall is not only personal discipline, it is institutional health. A mature field will have three visible layers. First, a stable kernel, constraints on phi patterns that repeatedly reconstruct omega, k, and nu coherently within declared uncertainty and scope. Kernel knowledge is engineering grade. Second, a living shadow archive. Anomalies, failures, edge cases, and near misses recorded without chain. This is the memory of the field. Third, mapped frontier zones. Regions where current grammars cannot stabilize triunity coherence, or where energy tallies refuse to converge, or where uncertainty refuses to shrink. These zones are named, not hidden. A field that refuses one of these layers is sick. A field with only a kernel drifts into dogma. A field that denies frontiers drifts into ideology. The firewall is how holophase science stays healthy, forever. Now let us translate this into the simplest operational behavior. What happens when a rule fails? In an ideological culture, failure triggers defense. The community believes harder. It attacks the questioner. It hides the data. In a firewalled culture, failure triggers license correction. If the rule still works in a narrower window, we narrow. If its uncertainty was underestimated, we downgrade confidence. If the anomaly reveals structure, we archive it and map it. If the rule fails repeatedly in its claimed scope, we retire it. Then we ask the only honest question. What new grammar family might explain both the kernel successes and the shadow failures, while remaining Phi-closed, triunity consistent, and falsifiable? This is how holophase science evolves without corruption. Now I want to say something that sounds philosophical, but is actually engineering. The firewall is freedom. It frees the scientist from ego, and it frees the community from priesthood. It allows you to say, not licensed yet, without shame. It allows you to say, undecidable here, without fear. It allows you to be confident in what is within scope and calm about what is not. Because the firewall exists, holophase can issue an invitation without turning into a religion. The invitation is not to believe, not to follow, not to accept authority. The invitation is to participate under discipline, measure honestly, declare scope, track uncertainty, respect falsification, archive anomalies, evolve the method without corrupting it. And this brings us to why the firewall must come before cosmogenesis. Origin stories are the easiest place for myth to sneak in. Without the firewall, cosmogenesis becomes sacred narrative. With the firewall, cosmogenesis becomes reconstructive inquiry, stepwise, falsifiable, scoped, and corrigible. So the ordering is non-negotiable. First the firewall, then the universe. Let me give you one more grounded analogy, and then I will release it quickly, so we stay focused. Think about learning to drive. At first, you do not just collect facts about cars. You learn a discipline. Mirrors, signals, speed limits, blind spots, braking distance, and what to do when something goes wrong. The road is the same road, but the method is what makes the road survivable. If you remove the method, driving becomes a gamble. Sometimes you arrive, sometimes you crash. And notice how driving always contains the three holophase handles. There is an omega handle, time. How long you have to react, how quickly conditions change. There is a K handle, space. Lane width, distance to the car ahead, and the curvature of the road. And there is a new handle, motion. Your speed and how disturbances propagate through traffic. If you ignore any one of these, you become dangerous. Science is the same. Ignore omega, K, or nu, and you become dangerous with concepts. This is also why the firewall feels, at its deepest level, like love. Not sentimental love, but coherent care. To care about truth is to refuse to misrepresent it. To care about people is to refuse to weaponize certainty. To care about a method is to keep it corrigible. In a world where confident voices can manipulate crowds, the firewall is a promise. I will not sell you certainty I did not earn. I will not hide the shadow archive to protect my pride. And I will not call my story universal when it is local and scoped. And remember, the firewall is not a cage. It is a compass. It lets us walk into the unknown without turning the unknown into a slogan. It keeps Holophase scientific even when the ideas feel cosmic and beautiful, even when our voices tremble. Before we go further, let me complete the Holophase mantra in plain audio language, because it is the anchor that keeps the whole episode honest. When I say, these echoes mix and weave into one another, I mean this. Patterns in Phi do not live in separate boxes. A twist in Phi that shows up as omega in one description will also show up as K and nu when you look again. The universe is not built from separate ingredients called time, space, and motion. It is one cyclic order field casting three shadows at once, and our job is to reconstruct those shadows responsibly. Now, the firewall is the constitutional foundation of this new science. A constitution is what stops a powerful system from turning into a dictatorship. Without it, the strongest voice becomes the law. With it, procedures become the law, and no single voice can own reality. Holophase must have a constitution because it is explicitly unifying. Unifying frameworks can become authority machines. They can be used to say, reality demands this, and then to silence disagreement by claiming the language itself is final. The firewall prevents that by demoting authority. In Holophase science, no person, institution, or equation owns truth. Licenses own truth. And licenses are earned by disciplined survival. Now let us speak about the four commitments again, but this time as living behaviors, not as abstract nouns. Phi-Closure means when you feel the urge to explain something by inventing a new thing, you pause. You do not patch gaps with new substances. You say, either our measurement is insufficient, our scope is wrong, or our grammar family is too narrow. Then you work inside those options. Triunity means when you give an explanation, you do not tell a time-only story. You reconstruct omega, K, and nu together from Phi under a declared window. You speak in coupled form, rhythm, structure, propagation, one Phi pattern. Energy demotion means when your audience asks, but what is energy really? You say, energy is a tally, an accounting summary of constraint and coherence. It is the number in the ledger, not a fluid in a tank. If the ledger disagrees across legitimate representations beyond uncertainty, you say, that mismatch is frontier data. Corrigibility means you practice downgrading with pride. You treat correction as strength, not humiliation. You celebrate the scientist who narrows scope honestly more than the speaker who pretends to be universal. Now, to show why corrigibility matters, imagine a young engineer who builds a model for a bridge. The model looks perfect in simulation. People praise it, and the engineer begins to identify with it. Then a test reveals a vibration mode the model did not predict. The ideological reaction is deny, hide, reinterpret, protect the story. The firewall reaction is record, narrow, correct, retest, and update the license label. The difference is not intelligence. The difference is discipline under pride. Now let us formalize license in audio terms, because this is the key operational object of the method. A license is a certificate attached to a rule. It says, this constraint on phi patterns is valid in this window. The window is declared with three handles: omega handle for duration and cadence, k handle for spatial domain and resolution, new handle for propagation regime and coupling conditions. And the license carries uncertainty, how confident we are given instruments and noise. You should be able to hear a license claim like a safety label, where it is safe, where it is unsafe, and what would cause recall. Now, here is the deep philosophical truth under the firewall, stated simply. Reality is richer than any finite grammar. Phi is cyclic, and its derivative possibilities are open-ended. Any finite set of constraints that captures a region of phi behavior will inevitably leave other behaviors outside its closure. This is not pessimism. This is the nature of a living cyclic field. The firewall encodes that truth into method, so we never confuse our current grammar with the world itself. And that is why the frontier is eternal. Not because we are weak, because reality is deep. You recognize you are at an edge when you cannot jointly stabilize omega, k, and nu inside one grammar family without trade-offs that refuse to disappear even as instruments improve. You recognize it when your energy tally stabilizes in one representation but refuses to reconcile in another, and the mismatch persists beyond declared uncertainty. The firewall says, that is not failure. That is the universe telling you where to build the next grammar. One concise note for audio clarity about symbols. In earlier parts, we sometimes use the letter V for the motion or kinematic dimension. Here, we use nu, spelled NU, because it sounds distinct in narration and keeps the tri-unity labels clean. Omega for time, K for space, nu for motion. The meaning does not change, only spoken clarity improves. If I ever slip and mix them later, forgive me, but now you know why nu is our chosen sound. Now, we must also speak about the institutional shape of this method, because a firewall is only real when it changes habits. A holophase paper should never hide uncertainty. It should never present a rule without a falsifier, and it should end with a license statement. A holophase archive should preserve failures as carefully as successes. And the holophase community should schedule audits as regularly as it schedules conferences. The audit is the ritual that keeps the method alive. Imagine an audit day. A team takes a famous kernel rule and tries to break it inside its own claimed scope. Another team reconstructs omega, k, and nu using a different pipeline. If the rule survives, its license tightens. If it fails, the correction is public, calm, and immediate. No shame, no heroics, just maintenance. Now we return to the invitation that ends this part, because an invitation is the opposite of a doctrine. A doctrine demands belief. An invitation offers participation. You are invited to measure honestly, to declare scope, to track uncertainty, to respect falsification, to archive anomalies, to evolve the method without corrupting it, and to do all of that while remembering triunity. Omega, K, Nu together, from Phi, under license. Energy remains tally only. The firewall persists, not as a wall, but as a compass.